May's U-turn on social care. There will now be a cap on costs. The manifesto was launched just 4 days ago, but a clearly rattled Tory leader insists this was no climb down.
We have not changed the principles of the policy that we set out in our manifesto. Those policies remain exactly the same.
Done another U-turn, Jeremy? Apparently, yes, apparently.
Labour and the Lib Dems say the manifesto's in meltdown.
They haven't said what the cap is. They haven't explained to the millions of people who are desperately worried at the moment about what kind of care they're going to get in the future. This is a government in chaos and confusion.
Also tonight, President Trump begins his historic visit to Israel and... The dramatic moment, a sea lion drags a young girl into the water before she's rescued by a relative.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Theresa May said she was just clarifying facts, but today she was accused of the most humiliating U-turn in the election so far. Just 4 days after unveiling the so-called dementia tax in her manifesto, she's been forced to climb down in the face of mounting voter concerns and a dive in the polls. She's announced a cap on social care costs in England. Her opponents described it as a manifesto meltdown. Emily Morgan is following the Conservative campaign and she sends this report.
He has done nothing wrong.
He came to protest against fox hunting and was quickly arrested for breaching the peace. If Theresa May felt hunted when she arrived at the launch of her Welsh manifesto, it was perhaps nothing compared to how she may have been feeling over the weekend. The Prime Minister had something to say on her social care proposals, and it was worth hearing.
I want to make a further point clear. This manifesto says that we will come forward with a consultation paper, a government green paper. And that consultation will include an absolute limit on the amount people have to pay for their care costs.
So a cap on care costs will now form part of her policy, not a U-turn, she says, but a clarification.
You say that you are prepared to take the difficult decisions, but you have just buckled under pressure over your social care plans. Isn't this U-turn really just a cynical attempt to stop voters leaving you in droves?
Let's be clear. We have not changed the principles that we set out in the manifesto. What we have done is clarified that in the Green Paper, which will be a consultation document, we will have a limit, upper limit, absolute limit on the amount that people will pay for care. But the basic principles remain absolutely the same.
So Theresa May has bowed to pressure and will look at imposing a cap on social care costs. It was a dramatic move and one that's unprecedented in an election campaign.
The manifesto published last week did promise a consultation on changes to social care, but made no mention of an absolute limit on the amount people pay. It proposed setting a floor, reading, no matter how large the cost of care, they will always retain at least 100,000 of their savings and assets. And it rejected proposals in the Dilnot report to cap costs, which it said mostly benefited a small number of people.
Has she done another U-turn, Jeremy? Apparently, yes, apparently.
Oh, blimey, you can't trust this woman. She does...
Old faces joined in the chorus of critics mocking Mrs May's change of heart.
They haven't said what the cap is. They haven't explained to the millions of people who are desperately worried at the moment about what kind of care they're going to get in the future, desperately worried for children as well about how their parents are going to be looked after. This is a government in chaos and confusion.
All right, how are you? Tim, nice to see you, OK? People, nice to see you.
The Liberal Democrats were equally unimpressed.
She's less Margaret Thatcher, more Captain Mannering or more likely Corporal Jones. It's more a case of don't panic than strong and stable.
The truth is, opinion polls at the weekend showed a rapid slide in the wrong direction for Mrs May. Today she put her character and reputation on the line to turn that around. It won't be long before we know if it was worth it. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Wrexham.
Well, the man who first came up with the idea of a social care cap said Mrs May's U-turn would reassure people. But Sir Andrew Dilnot said that would only happen once the amount was known. And so far, the Conservative leader is refusing to say what that amount will be, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
That's it, Eddie. Just put... Yeah, that's it.
Getting her husband Eddie out of bed into a chair is a real labour of love for Margaret Dangour. He has Alzheimer's and she has spent £100,000 of their money on his care. The care costs for Margaret's mother had reached £400,000, so unsurprisingly Margaret supports a cap on care costs.
It's very difficult for older people to start spending large amounts of money when you've been saving all your life. And you don't know about your future. You don't know how long you're going to live. My mother lived to 102. So there were many, many care years for her.
Sir Andrew Dilnot did persuade the last government to offer a cap on care costs.
The cap said, look, at the moment people have no way of controlling the risk that they all face, that they might be one of the unlucky ones who needs social care. The private sector insurance market is never going to cope with that risk, so the only way of doing it is by the state doing it.
After the Dilnot report, David Cameron's government proposed a £72,000 cap. But last week, Theresa May's manifesto was criticised for having no cap. Today, she said there would be a cap, but critically, not how much it would be.
How much difference does it make to people what the level will be?
Oh, that's very important. I mean, basically, the higher the cap, the fewer people will benefit, because everybody will have to spend much more before that state protection kicks in. But the lower the cap, the more it will cost.
Yet the Conservatives say they won't decide the level of the cap before the election. So those who need care don't know how much they'll have to pay, and neither do the taxpayers, who are being asked to vote for the plan. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
And our political editor Robert Peston is in Downing Street. So, Robert, how damaging could this be then for Mrs May in the election?
Well, whether we call it a climb down or an elaboration, this is seriously embarrassing for a politician who prides herself on being cautious, a safe pair of hands. Now, many would say better to change a policy than dogmatically stick to something that was causing huge anxiety to many thousands of people, and at least Theresa May, some would say, has a long-term plan to fix one of the great welfare problems of our age. None of the other parties do. They're chucking money at the problem. But, and here's what really matters, this social care policy was the one serious, unexpected part of the manifesto she published last week. And therefore, to discover that it wasn't properly thought through, well, that is indeed damaging to her reputation. Strong and stable as she claims she is, well, perhaps not tonight as much as she would like.
Robert Peston in Downing Street, thank you. As Mrs May backtracked on one of her main pledges, Jeremy Corbyn pushed ahead with one of his. The Labour leader said his promise to restore tuition fees would be brought forward so students studying this September could benefit. From the Labour campaign in Hull, here's Rachel Younger.
Leader of the Labour Party, Mr Jeremy Corbyn.
If Jeremy Corbyn is to win, he'll need young people to vote. And with just hours left to register, today's focus on tuition fees was a calculated attempt to woo a new generation.
Since the fees have gone up to 9,000 under the coalition government, the number of university applications has started to go down. Surely we should be investing in our future.
But abolishing student tuition fees won't come cheap. Labour's calculated the annual cost of the policy will be £9.5 billion a year. To discourage those heading to university this year from deferring, Labour has brought forward its plan to scrap tuition fees to this September. There'll be no more fees payable for students partway through their courses, and students who've already graduated are promised protection from above-inflation interest rate rises on their existing debt. And while the Tories insist Labour's sums don't add up, students in Hull say it's about time politicians stop taking away.
It's obviously like a crippling debt that young people shouldn't face. It's a looming thing over your head when you go and get a job and stuff.
I've always liked Jeremy Corbyn, and yeah, I think it's really good that he's doing that for students.
It's an offer that appeals to many parents too.
potentially 3 boys going to university is just horrific, just to think that you've got that burden before you start earning.
But remember, Labour's policies are meant to be about redistributing wealth. Economists point out the current system favours the students who earn least because they pay so little back.
For middle-class students and for wealthier students or graduates, they'll essentially repay a significant proportion or all of their loan. And this policy, what this is doing, is subsidising essentially the middle classes.
But it's clear Corbyn is giving the average student facing debts of over £40,000 in England plenty to smile about. He needs that gratitude to translate into votes. Another very big crowd then tonight waiting for Jeremy Corbyn to reappear here in Hull for an evening campaign rally. It's a real mix of old and new, but looking amongst the crowd, there are plenty of students here suggesting his message on tuition fees is hitting home. The problem for him is it's the age group that is least likely to actually turn out on election day. And so with less than 5 hours to go until the election registration deadline, this is about trying to persuade first-time voters to turn out. So the support he's getting here on the streets actually counts for something in the polls.
Rachel Younger in Hull, thank you. In other election news, the Green Party launched their manifesto today, vowing to create a confident and caring Britain. Among their proposals are plans to reverse what they call the privatisation of the NHS and to give voters a referendum on the terms of the Brexit deal.
It was the British people that set off this process. It is the British people who should be able to look at the small print of the final deal. And if they like it, then fine. But if they don't, then we should have that right to remain inside the EU, and that is what the Green Party is offering.
Sinn Féin also launched its manifesto calling for a referendum on a united Ireland in the next 5 years. The party, which was opposed to Brexit, also demands a special status for Northern Ireland within the EU. And there's just over 5 hours until the deadline to register to vote in the general election. For more details about how to do just that, head to our website, itv.com/news. Other news now, and Donald Trump has become the first sitting US president to visit the Western Wall in Jerusalem, one of Judaism's most holy sites. It came during the first day of his visit to Israel and the occupied territories. He was given a warm welcome there, but his hopes of achieving peace may get a more frosty reception, as our senior international correspondent John Irvine reports.
After the first ever official flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel, the Trumps stepped off Air Force One to great fanfare. Originally, a lower-key welcome was planned, but after the Saudis pulled out all the stops, the Israelis decided they needed more pomp and ceremony. Mr. Netanyahu believes he's close enough to the US president to put them on first-name terms, even in public.
Donald, Melania, welcome, a very warm welcome to Israel.
But Mr. Trump did not return the favor.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, Mrs. Netanyahu, thank you very much.
One of Mr. Netanyahu's party colleagues sought a selfie with Mr. Trump, but was rebuffed by the Israeli Prime Minister, who had other photographs in mind. During a final chat on the tarmac, Mrs. Netanyahu sought common ground.
Because the majority of the people of Israel, unlike the media, they love us. So we tell them how you are great and they love you. We have something very much in common. Very much in common.
Later in this trip, the Palestinians will have their turn to roll out the red carpet.
President Trump was always assured of the warmest of welcomes here. After all, for both sides in the Holy Land, he is the most influential person on the planet. Conversely, for people here, the president has become something of an unknown quantity. In short, people aren't exactly sure what to expect from him.
In the Old City, President Trump went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site, the Gospels tell us, of the crucifixion. And Mr. Trump became the first sitting president to go to the Western Wall, the most important site in Judaism. Israelis, however, are disappointed he did this alone. Mr. Netanyahu wanted to join him here, but the Americans said no because under international law, the wall is not in Israel, but on occupied land. This afternoon, the West Bank saw a resumption of the clashes that over the years have come to define the territorial dispute that President Trump says he's committed to resolving. John Irvine, ITV News, Jerusalem.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the Co-op is fined £400,000 after a customer slipped and died on a wet floor. And don't feed the sea lion. One little girl's lucky escape thanks to some brave passers-by. And those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. The Co-op has been fined hundreds of thousands of pounds after a customer slipped on some water in one of its stores and died. Stanley May, who was a regular at the supermarket in Cornwall, hit his head on the wet floor. Staff had known about the leak but had failed to safeguard customers. Paul Davis reports.
Retired railway worker Stan May had been a member of the Cooperative Society for most of his life. He was a regular customer at his local Co-op store in Truro, where everyone knew him by name. But 2 years ago, the 74-year-old grandfather died after slipping in a pool of water leaking from a chiller cabinet and falling heavily. His family successfully took the Co-op to court after it emerged that the chiller had been leaking onto the supermarket floor for 2 days.
This was so easily avoided. If they'd kept an eye on that water, my dad would still be alive today. So if anything is to come out of this, please just think about water on the floor. It sends me into panic attacks now when I see it.
The Co-op was fined £400,000 for failing to protect its customers.
They could have closed the aisle, they could have stationed a member of staff there, or even something as simple as putting some absorbent pads to control the leak as it happens.
In a statement today, the Co-op said, "The health and safety of our customers is always of paramount concern. We accept things went wrong and have acted on the lessons learnt from Mr. May's tragic death." And Stan May's tragedy provides just one lesson. The court heard in 1 year there were 5,000 incidents of people slipping on wet floors in Co-op stores. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Rolf Harris has arrived at court in person for the first time since leaving jail on Friday. The 87-year-old former TV star is on trial accused of indecent assault against 3 women in the 70s and 80s. Before today, he'd been appearing via video link because he was serving a sentence relating to other offences. And the BBC has apologised after one of its local radio stations ran a music quiz on the Moors murderer Ian Brady. Listeners were asked to guess the identity of a well-known person and were played musical clues, including a psycho killer. Now, the Football Association has asked bookmakers to pass on any information they may have about bets placed on the substitution of Chelsea's John Terry during his last game for the club. The captain came off in the 20... And finally tonight, the alarming moment. A young girl was dragged into the water by a large sea lion. She and her family had been feeding the wild animal at a dock in Canada when it suddenly pounced. Here's Sejal Karia.
A day by a harbour in Canada begins with laughter. And what appears to be a friendly sea lion. Then this.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
As panic breaks out, a man immediately dives in to help her. Before they're both pulled out of the water.
Are you all right?
The youngster was unharmed as she was led away. Michael Fujiwara captured the attack on his mobile phone.
I was just in shock. I didn't know what to do. I just paused. And then it hit me. Okay, I gotta help the girl. So I just grabbed the girl's hand, pulled her up, then grabbed the grandfather, and we all got them out of the water safely.
Just minutes before, his footage showed the sea lion eating pieces of bread that had been thrown into the water. But the harbour master says it was the parents, not the sea lion, to blame.
To be feeding, not only feeding the sea lion, a wild mammal, but then to let their little girl sit on the edge of the dock with their dress hanging over their back to it was really mindless behaviour.
This marine biologist says it should serve as a warning to others.
You should not think these are just characters out of a Disney movie. They're not pets. They're wild animals. They've got teeth, they can bite, and even unintentionally you can get bitten. So you want to keep your distance from them.
A cautionary tale to treat wildlife with respect. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
And that is all for now. Tom Bradby will be here with news at 10, but from me and all the team, have a great evening. Bye-bye.